Hello, wonderful butterflies of this world. It's your host here, Ash from Butterfly Shots. Welcome back to Ash Unmasked for another episode. The podcast where we talk about everything and anything, from books to lifestyle drama stories to everything in between. If you've been here a while, you already know this. Ash loves to talk, and it's no secret that we is a massive book lover. In this episode, we're continuing our discussion about Accept Value and Empower Yourself by David Bonham-Carter. We enjoyed this book because it is practical, simple, and rooted in CBT techniques. It's full of exercises and grounded tips. We loved it enough to dedicate 5 full episodes to unpack each chapter. Stick around, butterflies. We're just getting started. Before we get started, we'd like to put out a quick heads up. Some parts of this book can be triggering, especially if you're dealing with mental health situation or working through tough stuff. For anyone wanting to do self-work, our advice is to take your time and maybe even get help from a pro if that feels right for you. So let's rewind to the framework this book is based on. 5-step plan to help build self-esteem, which actually spells the word value. Value yourself, accept yourself, look after yourself, understand yourself, empower yourself, and you shall have better self-esteem. In our last episode, we explored the 3rd chapter of the book, Look After Yourself, and in this episode, we will discuss chapter 4, called Understand Yourself. So grab a cookie and a latte, or your favorite snack and beverage, and let's get to it, shall we? Boom 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 boom. Hey butterflies! Big news from behind the lens. Butterfly Shots is rebranding. Our official website is still under construction, but our brand new portfolio is out and about. This relaunch is all about Ash and her camera capturing real-life moments with a fresh vision. Embracing action shots, bold contrast, and vibrant colors. Stay tuned. We're just getting started. Give us a follow on social medias at Butterfly Shots Photography to hear all about our new services and products. We don't just take photos, we catch moments in flight. Butterfly shots, flight, butterfly, fly, shots, flight. Get it? Okay, bye-bye. Back to the episode. Boom, bada boom, 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 bada boom, 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 bada boom, 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 bada boom, boom. This chapter is all about understanding ourselves better. This is important to improve self-esteem because it helps to understand the roots of our thoughts, feelings, and behavior, especially the negative ones. This chapter explores negative thoughts and underlying core beliefs and how to reframe them with a more balanced vision. Because we can't change how we feel unless we understand why we feel it and challenge the story we tell ourselves. First off, the author reminds us something super important. Even the most capable, successful people can struggle with low self-esteem. Yep. Superstars, CEO, brilliant artists, your mom, anyone. So don't feel alone or weird if you're battling with that voice in your head that says, I'm not enough. In the last episode, we underlined that even superheroes are not perfect, and even them can struggle with low self-esteem. Now, what causes low self-esteem? This chapter lists a bunch of potential roots to this problem. Being put down repeatedly in our life. For example, people who got bullied, how we're treated in the family. For example, people who have nagging parents face a lot of criticism or maybe even emotional neglect, negative messages or bullying at school, rejection or harsh treatment from teachers or relatives. Really, here's a big potential root to low self-esteem. The parenting style you grew up with. Research shows that things like overly critical parents, parents with unrealistic expectations, or parents who have their own struggles with self-esteem or personal issues can really shape how we see ourselves. And here's another potential root, traumatic events. It is possible to develop low self-esteem as a result of traumatic events. But hold on, everybody's different. Everyone reacts differently to the same experiences. It's important to keep this in mind because we're all different. Some people bounce back easier, others carry more scars. Low self-esteem can develop later in life from the pressures of society, like discrimination, gender stereotypes, or exclusion. Here's an interesting info. Research suggests that females, especially in their late teens, tend to have slightly lower self-esteem than males. Women would often focus more on being accepted by others, while men focus more on their success or failure. Of course, everybody's different, but it is something to think about and just to keep in mind. Okay, so this is the why we have low self-esteem. And although it is super useful, it's not enough to just be like, it's because of my parents or school that we're like this. The book actually teaches a two-step approach to deal with these issues. The first step would be to understand the causes, the background, experiences, and the message that we absorbed. The second step is to learn ways to respond to those causes, ways to heal, grow, and build better self-esteem. The point of this is not to change who we are. It is rather to accept ourselves. Let's remind ourselves about the acceptance chapter. So, accepting who we are. Ultimately, that's what this chapter really digs in. Understanding the reasons for low self-esteem and also how to respond to the reason for low self-esteem. Here's the first exercise of this chapter. It is to explore labels. And basically, it's an exercise to explore how stereotypes may have affected us. It consists of 3 questions. We invite y'all to give this a thought if you want to. The first question goes like this. How would you describe yourself if you had to classify yourself by groups you belong to? For us, well, we don't really like labels, so this exercise made us a little bit uncomfortable, but also helped us to define ourselves better. So it's okay. For the sake of this exercise, we did label ourselves as a queer atypical artist, but also working class woman. How about you? How would you describe yourself? The second question goes like this. What few influential people in your life when you were a child or a teenager gave about the label group that you have answered to question 1? Think about how influential people in your life, like your grandparents or teachers, viewed those groups and what they expected from them. Personally, our parents didn't really get the queer thing at first. It can be harder to understand for older generations, but our parents always supported us and encouraged us to follow our heart and to do what made us happy. Society, sometimes society think of artists as weirdos, or they like to tell us to quit dreaming and get to work. Our parents, just what they say is, as long as can make a living, good, do what makes your heart sing. This question made us realize how supportive our parents were, honestly. What view did influential people in your life have? The third question of this exercise goes like this. What did those influential people in your life thought about the worth of people in those groups? Our parents taught us that everyone's worthy. Whether you pick up garbage or run a business or a superstar or a superhero or a homeless person, you have value. This exercise was actually kind of comforting for us to see how our parents accepted our being, and overall, our parents just want us to accept ourselves and love ourselves the way we are. That being said, society tends to think that people like us are weirdos, but that's okay. The struggle sometimes is really just with society, not the people closest to us, personally. How about you? Give this a thought and think about how this might have affected your view of your own worth. Next up, the author invites us to dig into negative and positive messages from our past, aka the background to the self-esteem. Here's the thing though, this exercise can be super triggering, especially if you're someone dealing with traumatic events. When reading the questions to these exercises, our anxiety immediately flared up. We felt very uncomfortable. Our heart started beating faster and our breath shorter. We choose to skip this exercise and That's okay, because self-care and self-love means knowing your limits. That's what we did. If you'd like to get more info about this exercise, well, we invite y'all to read the book. But here are the key takeaways to this exercise. When you catch yourself thinking a negative message about yourself, try to find where this comes from. Then challenge the thought by trying to balance it with a more positive or realistic thought. That could be, yeah, I messed up this time, but I'm learning and growing, and next time I'll do better. The author also points out that it's important to acknowledge if you have low self-esteem. Don't just ignore your low self-esteem and pretend it doesn't exist and fake it till you make it. There is no shame in having low self-esteem. It's actually more common than you think, and it is not a crime. Just by recognizing it, you're already on a path to feeling better. Remember this though, self-esteem is just one part of who you are. It is the way you feel about yourself. It doesn't define your entire being. Try taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture of who you are. There's really no need to punish ourselves for having low self-esteem or feeling bad about ourselves. We actually really love the next part of the book, a lot less triggering of an exercise. In order to take the step back and see the bigger picture, the author invites us onto this third exercise of the chapter, which is building a picture of ourselves in 5 steps. The first step is to identify some characteristics and values that are important to you. Read through a list and write down up to 5 values and characteristics that you would most like to demonstrate. For us, that sounded like healthy and balanced, learning from experiences, transparency and honesty, understanding, helping to others, generosity. This first step of this exercise also invites us to write down an example of a situation or event in which demonstrated the selected values. This is when we wrote a little story in our journal about a situation in our life when we actually applied all of this recently. We learned from past experiences, we were transparent and honest, and we're also understanding and kind, and we helped others. This actually feels good to think about. How about you? The second step of this exercise is to figure out what kind of person you would want to be. And there's 3 questions to address. The first question is, how do you think you currently come across to people? The author invites us to put her name and then give a description of how others might describe us. For us, Ash is the type of person who works hard, says what is on her mind, and speaks up. She's physically healthy, very intense and creative, talented, and very smart. How about you? How do you think you currently come across to people? Giving this a thought back might also come off as rude sometimes. Whoops. Working on that. The second question is, how did you used to come across to people? Same concept here. Put down your name and then give a description of how you used to come across to people. For us, it goes like this. Ash used to be the type of person who was funny, the party person, fun, not very reliable, had a lot of friends, was fearless, was not taking life so seriously. How about you? How did you used to come across to people? The third step is, what kind of person do you want to be? The author invites us to put her name and then give a description of what kind of person we'd want to be. Ash would like to be reliable, trustworthy, authentic, funny, hard worker, speaks up but in a kind manner, stays calm, is healthy and in balance, and creative and talented. How about you? What kind of person do you want to be? Give this a thought. Now, the third step of this exercise is to write an epitaph. Epitaph? Epitaph for yourself? Really, it's what you want people to say when you're gone. It kind of felt odd and weird, but we went along with it. Ours was funny artist who worked hard and gave generously. In the fourth step of this exercise, the author reminds us to look at the affirmation that we wrote in chapter 1. He invites us to revisit those affirmations in order to prepare for the fifth step of this exercise. For us, that was, I am generous and kind. I'm a graduate from a bachelor's in administration of business. I'm very successful in my master's. I'm courageous and strong. I do my best at things, even with my limitations. I'm a creative artist. I'm competent at the work that I do, and I'm beautiful and intelligent. How about you? What are some affirmations about yourself that would help seeing yourself more clearly and kindly? The fifth step of this exercise is to create a character description of ourselves. This was fun. We felt like we were writing a character description for some novel or something. Ash is beautiful. From her messy hair to her big gray eyes to her perfectly pedicured toes. She obtained her bachelor's degree and is now working on her master's degree very successfully. She's an A student, intelligent and competent at what she does. She's such a hard worker, and she always tries her best despite her limitations. Honest, generous, she speaks her mind. She's also talented, she's courageous and strong, and she keeps trying to do what makes her heart sing despite adversity. In fact, her story makes her kind of funny. How about you? What would be your character description? Whew, this was a big exercise, but it was fun. This is when the author gets to the part about the payoffs of low self-esteem. He underlines that sometimes having low self-esteem actually protects us from risk, disappointment, or change. Let's remind ourselves that our ego does not like change. The book gives an example. This book is packed with study cases, and it's very helpful to not feel so alone. The book gives an example of a social worker who hesitates to apply for a promotion. She's well respected by her colleagues, she's very professional, but there's a voice in her head that keeps telling her that she's not good enough, and she hesitates. One of her colleagues encourages her to go for the job, and her response is to explain that she doesn't think she's good enough for that job. Her colleague counters this by giving examples and evidence to support her view that she would be perfectly capable and competent of fulfilling the role that she'd be applying for. Then the social worker explains that her worries are not even around that. Her worries are around the fact that she might not get the job and would be devastated, or other members of the team might think that she's arrogant for applying for the job, or she might get the job and then find it too hard and make a fool of herself. In this example, the payoffs for this social worker of having low self-esteem are to protect her from taking risks that might result in shame or stress, and so she doesn't have to contemplate change by staying in her safe space. And this particular case feels very familiar to us. Yep. We're not a social worker, but yep. Anyway. The next exercise of this chapter is to try this process, and we invite y'alls to think about this if y'alls want. It's about considering the possible payoffs that we get of having low self-esteem and to write down a counter argument against each payoff. For us, the payoffs of low self-esteem looks like the social workers from the example. We stay in a secure place. It protects us from taking risks. It protects us from change. The payoff for us is security. We don't need to take risk, change, or get out of our comfort zone. The counter argument that we wrote for this is that sometimes taking risks can be beneficial. If we don't ever take risks, we could actually lose on a lot of opportunities. That being said, it would be better to take calculated risks. Another payoff that we get from low self-esteem is that personally we're very sensitive and gullible, so it protects us from getting manipulated or hurt. The counter argument that we wrote is that hurting is part of life, baby. By closing off, we're losing a lot of opportunities. Instead, we should learn how to deal with the hurt. It's okay to get hurt and scared. It's okay to question what someone tells us. The important thing to remember is that if we're hurt, we must feel our emotion, then look for the lessons. This is when the author invites us to complete another exercise. This one is about finding a particular aspiration that we would want to work towards in the next 6 months and to set ourselves one reasonable achievement, one reasonable action to achieve, and to commit to doing this. Personally, we will be working hard on being more kind while trying to assert our opinion, less aggressive. We would like to work on our communication skills. Perhaps we could get a book and talk about that on the podcast. How about you? What aspiration could you work towards in the next 6 months? The next part of this chapter talks about dealing with the fear of what people might think of us. Low self-esteem can be linked to a fear of making a fool of ourselves, like the social worker talked about in the study case. It could also be linked to a fear of offending people. The author proposes a technique called graded exposure to help overcome fears. Basically, graded exposure is when someone gradually exposes themselves to the thing they fear step by step, kind of like dipping the toes in the water instead of jumping right in. It's a technique used to deal with anxiety disorders and phobias. Pretty much, when someone fears something, they tend to avoid it. This technique, face it, but step by step, little by little. Personally, we used a technique that's very similar to this to help deal with our post-traumatic stress disorder issues. It's called exposure therapy. That being said, we do advise people that suffer from mental health disorder or mental health situation to be very careful in trying this sort of technique alone, because it can be very dangerous to the mental health to expose without any knowledge in how to do this. So we do recommend professional support. We did find a lot of success using the exposure therapy, and we still use this. Next, the author invites us to do an exercise. If you think that avoiding risks is part of your low self-esteem, you can create a list identifying risk-adverse behaviors that you have a tendency to adopt and alternative behaviors that you could adopt. For us, we noted down some risk-adverse behaviors and some alternate behaviors to try. One first risk-adverse behavior that we're adopting right now is to not take any photography clients anymore because it has become too stressful on our mental health. An alternative behavior to try that we thought of would be to take on some volunteer photo shoots to start, where there's no expectation on our output, and do this until we feel ready again, if we do, to take clients, but no pressure, one step at a time. A second risk-adverse behavior that we noted was to not sell our art creations anymore. An alternative behavior to try that we noted down would be to eventually get around to redoing the Butterfly Shots webpage and maybe include an online boutique, but not right now. No pressure, one thing at a time. Another risk-adverse behavior that we tend to adopt is to not go to activities that involve socializing because we get tired so fast we'll just pass out on a chair in a corner and get cranky. An alternative behavior we thought of would be to try to go to small activities or go to more places on our own. If we go somewhere and we don't like the energy there, we can always leave. They can say we're rude. Okay, one last risk-adverse behavior is, we have a lot. Bear in mind that we do deal with mental health issues. Anyway, one last risk-adverse behavior is, for a while we completely disconnected from social media. We went offline because social medias were getting so overwhelming for us. We felt like we just didn't get the point of it all. We felt very confused. An alternate behavior to try is to put up boundaries to the use of social medias, to keep them but with boundaries. And if we do feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable or unwell, we will disconnect when and if needed. How about you? Do you tend to avoid taking risks? Think about this for a minute. We're actually very proud to say that ever since we wrote this down, we did take on some volunteer photo shoots, we did go to a lot of new places on our own, and we did try small activities. We also got back on social medias with very strict boundaries. This was a very helpful exercise for us. Next up, the author talks about mindfulness practice for self-awareness. The author talks about how mindfulness is slowing down, focusing on your breath, being fully present. The author talks about how this can help us notice and manage automatic negative thoughts in our brain. He does suggest simple meditation techniques like sitting quietly and counting your breath up to 10, then starting over. This is actually like a breathing exercise if you think about it. The author talks about how to be mindful in our daily life, which is pretty much just not to rush through things. Stop trying to get stuff done as quickly as you can. Focus on what you're doing, on your breath and your experience while taking your time. Focus on each of the tasks that you do in a mindful way. This is when the author invites us on the next exercise of this chapter, which is to commit to trying out the simple meditation practice that he just talked about, aka the breathing exercise. Actually, we do yoga and meditation and breathing exercise almost on a daily, and we do try to bring mindfulness into our walk, eating, and photography. We do try as much as we can to live a mindful life. So we didn't do this particular exercise per se, but we do it on the daily. That being said, if meditation is not your thing, that's okay. Really, the key idea to this is to find something that helps you tune into your feelings and thoughts, not to push them down and ignore them, but tune into them and feel them. The author also suggests or recommends to keep a journal to write down our worries, hopes, patterns, reflect on what our inner critic sounds like, then respond to that critical voice as we would to our best friend in a kindly and supportive manner. The author talks about how to use a journal to tackle negative inner voices. First, get yourself a notebook, then start writing in the notebook. You can reflect on concerns, things that are going well, hopes for the future, things that are not going so well for you, frustration, anxieties, any patterns you notice in your life, positive or negatives, how you acted in a situation, how you thought and felt, the achievements are positive in your day. Just try journaling for a week. Look back at your journal. Do you see patterns? Can you associate them patterns with any voices from the past or present? It's time to challenge that negative voice. Answer to it like you would to a best friend. So this is the next exercise. The author invites us to try to complete a journal for the next 2 weeks, following whatever frame we want to. Now we do journal, and we have been journaling almost on the daily for years now. We do encourage people to journal, but it doesn't have to be written down, Journaling can be drawings, painting, photographing. Journaling can take many other forms. These are just tools to get to know yourself and tune into how you feel. But there are other tools out there. The key idea is to get to know yourself and what works. Lastly, author goes over the key ideas from chapter 4. And these are that certain parenting styles can contribute to a child's low self-esteem. Experiences of abuse, neglect, rejection can lead to low self-esteem. There are correlations between levels of self-esteem and issues of discrimination, but they're not clear-cut. Society's cultural and gender-related expectations and stereotypes may contribute to the types of issues that affect our self-esteem. The labels that we believe about ourselves may impact our self-esteem. Balancing thought can be used to put our ideas or feelings into perspective. And it is possible to try to balance issues by creating more positive and realistic character descriptions of ourselves to take a step back. In order to help address our low self-esteem issues, it's important to identify any payoffs that we get from low self-esteem and to challenge flawed thinking about those payoffs. Some of the ways to help deal with negative thoughts and feelings are to adopt mindfulness techniques or to create a self-esteem journal. This chapter was a lot. It was totally worth it. Thank you so much for joining us on this discussion of chapter 4 of the book Accept, Value, and Empower Yourself by David Bonham-Carter. Be sure to tune back in next Saturday at 10 for the next part of this mini-series all about chapter 5, Empowering Yourself. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Have you read this book? What were your biggest takeaways? Drop us a message and let's chat. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episode of the Ash Unmasked podcast. Thanks again for fluttering by the pod. Can't wait to unmask more of this life journey with y'alls. Peace out and take care of yourselves out there.